3 times in 50 years, fire consumed San Francisco's most famous landmark. Dynamite, Christmas inferno, Millionaire's dream in ashes. But here's the twist. Nature wasn't done yet. This is the cursed story of the Cliff House, where human ambition met the Pacific's wrath, and the ocean always won. For the third time in less than half a century, flames were devouring the Cliff House. It was September 7th, 1907, and the magnificent 7-story Victorian palace that had stood proudly on the cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean was being consumed by an inferno so massive that people could see it from miles away across San Francisco. Crowds gathered on the beaches below, watching in horror as the towers that had defined the coastline for 11 years collapsed one by one into the churning waters beneath. By the time the sun set that evening, only charred stone foundations remained. The curse had claimed its final victim. But to understand why this moment felt so inevitable, why San Franciscans whispered about curses and angry gods, we need to go back to the beginning, back to when the Cliff House was nothing more than an ambitious dream perched impossibly on the edge of the world. San Francisco in the 1860s was a city transformed. The gold rush had turned a sleepy frontier settlement into a booming metropolis practically overnight. Fortunes were being made and lost daily. The newly wealthy needed places to see and be seen, to display their success, to escape the chaos of the rapidly growing city. Captain Samuel Brannan, one of California's first millionaires, saw an opportunity that everyone else thought was madness. He looked at the wild, windswept cliffs at Land's End, where the Pacific Ocean crashed violently against jagged rocks, where fog rolled in thick enough to lose yourself in, where the nearest civilization was a treacherous, muddy road away, and he thought, this is perfect. In 1863, Brannan built the first Cliff House. It was a simple structure by later standards, just a modest roadhouse, but its location made it extraordinary. Perched precariously on those rocky cliffs, it offered something no other establishment in San Francisco could match, a view that made you feel like you were standing at the very edge of existence. Below the building, seal rocks jutted from the ocean, covered with thousands of barking sea lions whose sounds carried up on the salt wind. The journey to reach the Cliff House was half the adventure. Wealthy San Franciscans would make the trek in horse-drawn carriages, bouncing along rough roads, the anticipation building with every mile. The original Cliff House quickly became the place to be. It was exclusive, remote, romantic. Couples would travel there for intimate dinners. Businessmen would seal deals over whiskey while watching the sun sink into the Pacific. Families would make Sunday excursions, children pressing their faces against windows to watch the sea lions below. For over 2 decades, the Cliff House thrived. It survived storms that would have destroyed lesser buildings. It weathered the isolation that kept away all but the most determined visitors. It seemed like Captain Brannan's mad gamble had paid off. Then came January 16, 1887, a foggy morning, the kind where you couldn't see more than a few feet in front of your face. The schooner Parallel was navigating the treacherous waters near Land's End, carrying a cargo that would make any sailor nervous: 40 tons of dynamite. In the thick fog, the ship ran aground on the rocks directly below the Cliff House. The crew scrambled to safety, but the cargo remained. For hours, workers attempted to salvage the dynamite, moving carefully, knowing that one wrong move could be catastrophic. They never got the chance to finish. The explosion, when it came, was unlike anything San Francisco had ever experienced. The blast was so powerful that windows shattered for miles. The ground shook as if the earth itself was tearing apart. Eyewitnesses later described it as the end of the world, a wall of sound and fury that seemed to come from the ocean depths. The Cliff House, sitting directly above the explosion, took the full force of the blast. Walls cracked. The structure was compromised. Windows that had looked out on such beauty for 24 years were blown inward, showering the elegant dining rooms with glass. The building survived, technically, but it was mortally wounded. As workers surveyed the damage, as owners calculated repair costs, something else began to circulate through San Francisco: whispers of a curse. It was an accident, everyone agreed. But what kind of place attracts such disasters? What kind of location draws a ship carrying 40 tons of dynamite to crash directly beneath it? The rational-minded dismissed such talk, of course. But the seed was planted. The owners rebuilt. They had to. The Cliff House was too valuable, too beloved, too profitable to abandon. Within months it was open again, welcoming back the crowds who had missed their edge-of-the-world dining experience. For 7 years normalcy returned. The curse talk faded. Life went on. Christmas Eve, 1894. The Cliff House was full of celebration. Families had gathered for holiday dinners. The dining rooms glowed with warm light against the winter darkness. Outside, the Pacific crashed against the cliffs as it always did, indifferent to human festivities. Inside, there was laughter, music, the clinking of glasses, the smell of roasting meat. It was, by all accounts, a perfect Christmas Eve. Late in the evening, someone in the kitchen noticed smoke, a small fire, nothing to panic about initially. But this was the 1890s. Fire suppression technology was primitive. The building was made largely of wood, and most critically, the Cliff House was remote. By the time someone could ride for help, by the time fire wagons could make the long journey out to Land's End, by the time firefighters could set up their equipment, it was far too late. The fire spread with terrifying speed. Guests fled into the cold December night, some still in their dinner clothes, watching helplessly as the building that had survived dynamite was consumed by flames. The firefighters, when they finally arrived, could do nothing. There was no water pressure this far from the city. The wind whipped the flames higher. By Christmas morning, as families across San Francisco were opening presents and celebrating, the Cliff House was nothing but smoking ruins and charred timbers. This time, the curse talk wasn't just whispers. It was open conversation. Dynamite explosion. Christmas fire. Twice destroyed in 7 years. What kind of place suffers such relentless catastrophe? Newspapers ran stories speculating about the Cliff House curse. Some blamed the location itself, suggesting the cliffs were somehow unlucky. Others pointed to the sea lions on Seal Rocks, wondering if disturbing them had angered some ocean spirit. The more scientifically minded noted the obvious. Building on remote, wind-swept cliffs with primitive fire safety was simply asking for trouble. But here's the thing about curses. They only have power if people believe in them. And after the Christmas fire of 1894, many people believed. So when the question arose of whether anyone would dare rebuild the Cliff House a second time, the answer seemed obvious. No one would be foolish enough to tempt fate again. Enter Adolf Sutro. If you're going to defy a curse, you need someone who doesn't believe in curses. Someone with vision, wealth, and just enough arrogance to think they can succeed where others failed. Sutro was all of these things. He was a German immigrant who had made an enormous fortune in Nevada's silver mines through engineering brilliance and business savvy. He loved San Francisco with the passion of someone who had chosen it rather than being born to it. He already owned much of the land around the Cliff House area, and he had plans. Big plans. Sutro didn't just want to rebuild the Cliff House. He wanted to create something that would make people forget there had ever been a curse. He envisioned a magnificent Victorian palace, 7 stories tall, with towers and turrets and observation decks. It would be a French chateau transplanted to the California coast, a statement of human achievement that would stand for centuries. And it wouldn't stand alone. Sutro was also building the Sutro Baths nearby, which would become the world's largest indoor swimming complex. Together, these attractions would transform Land's End from a remote curiosity into San Francisco's premier destination. The construction was a nightmare. Building on unstable cliffs is never easy. The Pacific storms battered the work crews. Salt air corroded materials. The engineering challenges were immense. The cost spiraled into what would be tens of millions in today's dollars. But Sutro was undeterred. He had a vision, and he had the wealth to make it real. More than that, he had something to prove. He would show San Francisco that the curse was nonsense, that human ingenuity could triumph over superstition and bad luck. In 1896, the new Cliff House opened. It was everything Sutro had promised and more. The building was an architectural marvel, ornate and grand, with towers that seemed to reach toward the sky. Multiple dining rooms offered different experiences, from casual to elegant. Observation decks provided panoramic views that took your breath away. You could see the entire sweep of the Pacific, watch ships passing in the distance, observe the sea lions on seal rocks below. On clear days, you could see for miles in every direction. It was, without question, the most spectacular building on the San Francisco coast. The public response was overwhelming. The Sutro Railroad, which Sutro had built specifically to bring visitors to his attractions, carried thousands of people weekly. High society flocked to the new Cliff House for galas and celebrations. Tourists came from around the world to experience this architectural wonder perched on the edge of America. Couples got engaged on the observation decks. Families made it a Sunday tradition. The Cliff House became more than a restaurant or attraction. It became a symbol of San Francisco itself, a testament to the city's ambition and grandeur. For 11 years, Sutro's triumph seemed complete. The curse was forgotten, dismissed as the superstitious nonsense it had always been. The Cliff House stood proud and beautiful, weathering storms, hosting celebrations, creating memories. Adolf Sutro himself died in 1898, but his creation lived on, a monument to his vision and determination. Everything seemed perfect. September 7th, 1907. Early morning, another fire. This time there was no clear cause, no kitchen accident, no obvious source. It simply began, as if the building itself had spontaneously decided to burn. And burn it did. The fire spread through the 7-story structure with horrifying speed. By the time firefighters arrived, the building was already engulfed. The towers that had defined the skyline became pillars of flame, visible for miles. The ornate woodwork that had taken years to craft was consumed in minutes. The observation decks, where thousands had stood to admire the view, collapsed into the inferno below. Crowds gathered on the beaches, just as they had during the Christmas fire 13 years earlier. They watched in stunned silence as Sutro's masterpiece was destroyed. The heat was so intense that people had to stand far back. The sound of the fire was deafening, a roar that competed with the ocean itself. When the towers finally collapsed, crashing down into the Pacific, some witnesses later said they heard the sea lions on seal rocks barking, as if commenting on the spectacle. By afternoon, it was over. The magnificent 7-story Victorian palace that had stood for only 11 years was gone. Only the stone foundations remained, blackened and broken. The curse had claimed its third victim, and this time, there was no denying it. 3 major disasters in 44 years. Dynamite explosion. Christmas fire, mysterious inferno. The pattern was undeniable, the legend was solidified. Newspapers declared that the Cliff House was finished forever, that no one would be foolish enough to build there again, that nature had spoken and humanity should listen. But here's where the story takes an interesting turn, because someone did rebuild. In 1909, new owners took a completely different approach. Instead of grandeur, they chose humility. Instead of a 7-story palace, they built a modest 1-story structure. It was simple, practical, respectful of the location, rather than defiant of it. And remarkably, this version survived. It weathered the aftermath of the 1906 earthquake. It became a beloved local institution through the 20th century. It was renovated and expanded multiple times. The curse, it seemed, had been satisfied. Or perhaps, the lesson had finally been learned. The modern Cliff House has faced its own challenges. A major renovation in 2003, closure during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, an announcement of permanent closure in December 2020, new operators taking over in 2021. The cycle continues, though without the dramatic catastrophes of the past. The location remains as challenging as ever. The Pacific still crashes against those cliffs. The wind still howls. The salt air still corrodes. But the building endures. So what do we make of the curse? Was it real? The rational explanation is straightforward. The Cliff House was built in an extraordinarily challenging location. The cliffs are geologically unstable. The exposure to Pacific storms is relentless. The isolation made emergency response nearly impossible in the 19th century. Fire safety standards were primitive. The dynamite explosion was a freak accident, but accidents happen more easily in dangerous locations. There was no supernatural curse. There was simply geography, bad luck, and the hubris of building in a place that nature never intended for permanent structures. But there's a deeper truth here, one that goes beyond rational explanations. The Cliff House curse represents something fundamental about the human experience. We are drawn to edges, to boundaries, to places where we can stand and feel the full force of nature's power. We want to build there, to claim those spaces, to prove that we can survive and thrive even in the most challenging environments. And sometimes, nature pushes back. Not out of malice or supernatural anger, but simply because some places are not meant to be conquered. The Cliff House became a symbol of San Francisco precisely because it embodied this tension. It was beautiful because it was precarious. It was special because it was dangerous. Every meal eaten there, every sunset watched from its decks, every moment spent in that building carried an undercurrent of awareness that you were somewhere extraordinary, somewhere that existed in defiance of common sense. The curse, real or imagined, was part of the appeal. It made the Cliff House more than just a restaurant. It made it a legend. Consider what the Cliff House represented to different generations. To the gold rush millionaires of the 1860s, it was a status symbol, proof that they had the wealth and daring to dine on the edge of the world. To the families of the 1880s and 90s, it was an adventure, a journey to a place that felt wild and untamed even as San Francisco grew more civilized. To Adolf Sutro, it was a canvas for his vision, a chance to create something magnificent that would outlast him. To the crowds who watched it burn in 1907, it was a reminder that human achievement is always temporary, always vulnerable to forces beyond our control. The sea lions on seal rocks below have watched every version of the Cliff House rise and fall. They were there before the first building went up in 1863. They were there when the dynamite exploded in 1887. They watched the Christmas fire of 1894. They saw Sutro's palace burn in 1907. They're still there today, barking and diving and living their lives completely indifferent to human drama. In a way, they're the only permanent residents of that stretch of coastline. Everything else is temporary. This impermanence is what makes the Cliff House story so compelling. We want to believe that what we build will last. We want our creations to outlive us, to stand as monuments to our existence. The Cliff House kept promising that permanence and then snatching it away. 3 times, people invested money, time, dreams, and ambition into creating something lasting on those cliffs. 3 times, it was destroyed. The message seemed clear. This place will not be tamed. Yet people kept trying. That's the other half of the story. After each disaster, someone decided to rebuild. After the dynamite explosion, after the Christmas fire, even after the 3rd catastrophe in 1907, someone looked at those ruins and thought, "We can do this again." That persistence, that refusal to accept defeat, is as much a part of the Cliff House legend as the curse itself. The building kept falling, and humanity kept picking it back up. There's something deeply San Franciscan about this. The city itself has been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times. The 1806 earthquake and fire leveled much of San Francisco, yet the city rebuilt bigger and better. The Loma Prieta earthquake of 1989 caused massive damage, yet the city recovered. San Francisco exists in one of the most seismically active regions on Earth, yet millions of people choose to live there. The Cliff House, in its way, is a microcosm of the city's entire philosophy. Build in impossible places, accept the risks, and when disaster strikes, build again. The curse narrative also reveals something about how we process tragedy. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. When bad things happen repeatedly, we look for explanations. A curse is, in its way, more comforting than randomness. If the Cliff House was cursed, then its disasters had meaning, had purpose. They were part of a story rather than just a series of unfortunate events. The alternative, that sometimes bad things just happen for no reason, is harder to accept. So the curse legend grew and persisted, giving shape and narrative to what might otherwise be meaningless destruction. But perhaps the real curse wasn't supernatural at all. Perhaps the curse was simply the location itself. Land's End is called that for a reason. It's where the continent ends and the ocean begins. It's a transition zone, a boundary space, inherently unstable and dangerous. The cliffs are constantly being eroded by wind and waves. The weather is unpredictable and often violent. The isolation that made the location romantic also made it vulnerable. Building there was always going to be a challenge. The curse was geography dressed up in supernatural clothing. Yet knowing all this, understanding the rational explanations, doesn't diminish the power of the story. The Cliff House curse endures because it speaks to something deeper than facts and logic. It speaks to our relationship with nature, our ambition to build in places we probably shouldn't, and the consequences that follow. It reminds us that for all our technology and engineering prowess, we are still subject to forces beyond our control. The photographs that survive from the various iterations of the Cliff House are haunting. You can see Sutro's magnificent palace in its glory, towers reaching skyward, flags flying, crowds of people in their Victorian finery gathered on the decks. You can see the same building engulfed in flames, the towers collapsing, the dream dying in real time. These images capture the entire arc of human ambition in a single location. We build, we celebrate, we lose, we mourn, and then we build again. What's particularly striking is how each version of the Cliff House reflected the era that created it. The original 1863 structure was simple and functional, matching the rough and ready spirit of Gold Rush, California. Sutro's Victorian palace was ornate and excessive, reflecting the Gilded Age's love of grandeur and display. The 1909 rebuild was modest and practical, reflecting a more cautious, realistic approach born from hard lessons learned. Each building was a product of its time, and each met an end that seemed almost predetermined by the challenges of the location. The human stories embedded in the Cliff House history are equally compelling. Think about the workers who built Sutro's palace, laboring on those windswept cliffs, knowing the history of the site, perhaps wondering if they were constructing something doomed. Think about the families who celebrated Christmas Eve 1894 at the Cliff House, enjoying what they thought would be a memorable holiday, having no idea they would be fleeing into the night hours later. Think about the firefighters who responded to the 1907 blaze, arriving to find a 7-story inferno that they were powerless to stop, watching helplessly as the building collapsed. Consider also Adolf Sutro himself. He died in 1898, 9 years before his masterpiece burned. Did he die believing he had beaten the curse? Did he spend his final years looking at his creation with satisfaction, knowing he had succeeded where others failed? Or did he, in quiet moments, wonder if the curse was simply biding its time? We'll never know. But there's a certain mercy in the timing. Sutro never had to watch his dream burn. He never had to face the reality that the curse, if it existed, was patient enough to wait until he was gone. The economic impact of the Cliff House disasters was substantial. Each destruction meant lost jobs, lost revenue, lost investment. The businesses that depended on Cliff House traffic suffered. The Sutro Railroad, built specifically to bring visitors to the area, lost its primary attraction when the palace burned. Insurance companies, already wary of the location after the first 2 disasters, must have been even more reluctant to provide coverage after the third. The curse, real or not, had real financial consequences. Yet the location never lost its appeal. Even when the Cliff House lay in ruins, people still came to Land's End. They came to see where it had stood, to imagine what it had been like, to stand at the edge and feel what generations before them had felt. The view didn't change. The sea lions on Seal Rocks continued their daily routines. The Pacific kept crashing against the cliffs. The essential magic of the location persisted regardless of what structure stood there or didn't stand there. This raises an interesting question. Was the building ever really the point? Or was it always about the location, with the Cliff House serving merely as an excuse to visit? A frame for the natural spectacle? Perhaps the curse, if we want to call it that, was nature's way of reminding us that the real attraction was never the human construction. The real attraction was and always has been the raw power and beauty of the coastline itself. The buildings were just temporary visitors, tolerated for a while before being swept away. The modern visitor to the Cliff House site experiences something unique. They can see the current structure, modest and practical, still serving meals with that incredible view. But they can also see, if they know where to look, traces of what came before. Foundation stones from earlier versions. Photographs in the building showing the magnificent palace that once stood there. The ghosts of previous iterations haunt the location, visible to those who know the history. It's like looking at a palimpsest, where earlier writings show through the current text. The curse legend has also become a tourist attraction in its own right. Ghost tours include the Cliff House in their roots. Books about haunted San Francisco inevitably feature the story. The curse has become part of the city's mythology, as much a part of San Francisco's identity as the Golden Gate Bridge or cable cars. In a strange way, the disasters that were meant to destroy the Cliff House's reputation actually enhanced it, transforming it from a mere restaurant into a legend. There's also something to be said about the timing of the disasters. The dynamite explosion happened during a time when San Francisco was still rough around the edges, when such accidents, while shocking, fit into a broader pattern of frontier chaos. The Christmas fire happened during the Gilded Age, when excess and tragedy often went hand in hand. The 1907 fire happened just a year after the devastating earthquake and fire that destroyed much of San Francisco. Each disaster occurred during a period when the city was already grappling with questions of permanence, safety, and the price of ambition. The earthquake and fire of 1906 deserve special mention here. That catastrophe killed thousands and destroyed most of San Francisco. In the aftermath, as the city rebuilt, there must have been serious discussions about whether to rebuild the Cliff House at all. The city had just been reminded, in the most brutal way possible, of its vulnerability. Building codes were being rewritten. Safety was suddenly paramount. Yet even in that context, even after watching their city burn, San Franciscans decided that, yes, the Cliff House should be rebuilt. The curse be damned. This decision reveals something essential about the human spirit. We are not rational creatures when it comes to places we love. We know the risks, we understand the dangers, but we build anyway. We build on earthquake faults, in flood zones, on hurricane coasts, on unstable cliffs overlooking the Pacific. We build because the alternative, abandoning these places, feels like admitting defeat. The Cliff House, in all its iterations, represents this fundamentally human refusal to let nature dictate our choices, but nature always gets the last word. That's the ultimate lesson of the Cliff House curse. We can build and rebuild. We can engineer solutions to seemingly impossible problems. We can throw money and determination at any challenge. But we cannot change the fundamental reality of the location. The cliffs will continue to erode. The storms will continue to batter the coast. The isolation will continue to make emergency response difficult. These are not problems that can be solved. They are conditions that must be accepted. The sea lions on Seal Rocks understand this in a way humans never quite can. They don't fight the ocean. They don't try to build permanent structures. They live in harmony with the chaos, riding the waves, adapting to the storms, accepting the fundamental impermanence of their environment. They were there before the first Cliff House, and they'll be there after the last one falls. They are the true permanent residents of Land's End, and they've watched the human drama unfold with what we might imagine is bemused indifference. There's a photograph from the 1907 fire that captures something essential about the entire Cliff House story. It shows the building fully engulfed in flames, towers collapsing, smoke billowing into the sky. But in the foreground, you can see Seal Rocks, and on those rocks, sea lions are clearly visible, going about their business as if nothing unusual is happening. The contrast is striking. Human achievement burning to nothing while nature continues unchanged. It's a visual representation of the curse narrative. We build, we fail, nature endures. The question of whether anyone was killed in any of the Cliff House disasters is worth addressing. Remarkably, despite the violence of the dynamite explosion, Despite the intensity of the fires, there are no confirmed deaths directly attributable to the Cliff House curse. People were injured in the explosion. People fled the fires. But no one died. This fact complicates the curse narrative. If the location was truly cursed, if nature was truly angry at human presence, wouldn't the disasters have been even more catastrophic? The fact that only buildings were destroyed, not lives, suggests that perhaps the curse, if it existed, was more about property than people. Or perhaps that's giving too much credit to supernatural explanations. The more likely reality is that the Cliff House was simply lucky in its unluckiness. The dynamite explosion happened when few people were in the building. The Christmas fire started late enough that most guests had time to evacuate. The 1907 fire began early in the morning before the building was full. Timing, not curses, saved lives. But timing is less romantic than curses, less memorable, less likely to become legend. The economic history of the Cliff House is also instructive. Each version required enormous investment. Each promised substantial returns. Each delivered for a while before being destroyed. The financial risk of building at Land's End was always high, but so were the potential rewards. The Cliff House was never just a restaurant. It was a destination, an experience, a status symbol. People would pay premium prices for the privilege of dining on the edge of the world. That economic reality kept drawing investors back despite the curse, despite the history, despite the obvious risks. Adolf Sutro's investment was particularly significant. He didn't just build a restaurant. He built an entire entertainment complex, including the Sutro Baths, the Sutro Railroad, and extensive gardens. He envisioned Land's End as San Francisco's premier attraction, a place where all classes of people could come to enjoy natural beauty and human achievement. His vision was democratic in a way that was unusual for the Gilded Age. The Cliff House and its surroundings were meant to be accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy elite. When his palace burned in 1907, it wasn't just a building that was lost. It was a vision of what San Francisco could be. The curse narrative tends to focus on the disasters, but it's worth remembering the years of success between catastrophes. The original Cliff House operated for 24 years before the dynamite explosion. That's nearly a quarter-century of successful operation, of memories made, of sunsets watched, of meals shared. Sutro's palace stood for 11 years. That's 11 years of grandeur, of celebrations, of tourists from around the world experiencing something unique. Even the modest 1909 structure has now stood for over a century. The curse, if it exists, is not constant. It's patient, waiting years or decades between strikes. This pattern of long success followed by sudden disaster is actually more unsettling than constant problems would be. If the Cliff House had been plagued by continuous small disasters, people would have simply stopped going. But the long periods of normalcy created a false sense of security. Each generation of owners and visitors could convince themselves that the curse was over, that this time would be different, that the past disasters were flukes. And then, when everyone had relaxed, when the curse had been forgotten, disaster would strike again. There's a psychological term for this: normalcy bias. It's the tendency to believe that because something hasn't happened recently, it won't happen at all. The Cliff House curse exploited this bias perfectly. 24 years is long enough for a generation to grow up never knowing disaster. 11 years is long enough to forget that the location has a history. The curse worked by lulling people into complacency before striking. But, again, we're attributing agency and intention to what were likely just unfortunate coincidences and the inevitable consequences of building in a challenging location. The curse narrative is compelling, but it's important to remember that it's a narrative, a story we tell to make sense of events that might otherwise seem random and meaningless. The truth is probably more mundane. Building on unstable cliffs in an era of primitive fire safety was always going to end badly eventually. The surprise isn't that the Cliff House burned multiple times. The surprise is that it lasted as long as it did between fires. The legacy of the Cliff House extends beyond the building itself. It influenced San Francisco's development, drawing attention and infrastructure to the western edge of the city. The Sutro Railroad, built to serve the Cliff House, opened up entire neighborhoods. The popularity of Land's End as a destination led to the development of parks and trails that San Franciscans still enjoy today. The Cliff House was never just about the building. It was about making the edge of the continent accessible, about bringing people to a place they might never have visited otherwise. Today, visitors to the Cliff House site are standing in a location that has witnessed over a century and a half of human drama. They're standing where gold rush millionaires once dined, where Victorian families celebrated holidays, where Adolf Sutro's grand vision briefly became reality. They're standing where 3 major disasters occurred, where fortunes were lost, where dreams burned. The ground beneath their feet is soaked in history, both triumphant and tragic. The view, of course, remains unchanged. That's the constant in the Cliff House story. Regardless of what building stood there or didn't stand there, regardless of curses or disasters or human ambition, the view has always been spectacular. The Pacific stretches to the horizon. The sea lions bark on seal rocks. The fog rolls in and out. The sun sets in brilliant colors. This is what drew people to Land's End in the first place, and it's what continues to draw them today. The buildings come and go, but the view is eternal. So what is the curse of the Cliff House? Is it supernatural? Is it geographical? Is it simply bad luck compounded by poor planning? Perhaps it's all of these things and none of them. Perhaps the curse is just a story we tell, a way of making sense of the fact that some places resist human attempts to claim them permanently. Perhaps the curse is our own ambition, our refusal to accept that some locations are meant to be visited, not conquered. The Cliff House stands today, modest and practical, serving meals with that incredible view. It has survived longer than any previous version. Has the curse been broken? Or is it simply waiting, patient as always, for the right moment to strike again? We don't know. We can't know. That uncertainty is part of what makes the location special. Every meal eaten there, every sunset watched, carries the awareness that this might be temporary, that the history of the place suggests nothing lasts forever here. But perhaps that's the real gift of the Cliff House. In a world where we try to make everything permanent, where we build to last centuries, where we resist change and impermanence, the Cliff House reminds us that nothing lasts forever. Beauty is temporary. Achievement is fragile. Nature is patient. These aren't depressing truths. They're liberating ones. They remind us to appreciate what we have while we have it, to not take permanence for granted, to understand that the value of something isn't measured by how long it lasts, but by the experiences it creates while it exists. The cursed story of the Cliff House is ultimately a story about the relationship between humanity and nature, between ambition and humility, between building and accepting. It's a story that has played out over more than a century and a half, through multiple disasters and multiple rebuilds, through triumph and tragedy. It's a story that isn't over yet. The current Cliff House might stand for another century, or it might be gone tomorrow. The curse, if it exists, doesn't operate on human timelines. What we can say with certainty is that the Cliff House, in all its iterations, has given San Francisco something invaluable, a legend. Cities need legends. They need stories that capture something essential about the place and its people. The Cliff House curse does exactly that. It captures San Francisco's relationship with risk, with beauty, with the edge of things. It captures the city's refusal to play it safe, its determination to build in impossible places, its resilience in the face of disaster. The sea lions on Seal Rocks will outlast us all. They'll be there when the current Cliff House is gone, when whatever replaces it is gone, when the entire history of human presence at Land's End is forgotten. They'll still be barking, still diving, still living in harmony with the chaos of the Pacific coast. They are the true victors in the story of the Cliff House curse. They never tried to conquer the location. They simply accepted it for what it was and adapted accordingly. Perhaps that's the lesson we should take from the cursed story of San Francisco's most famous landmark. Some places aren't meant to be conquered. They're meant to be experienced, appreciated, respected. The Cliff House, in all its iterations, has given generations of people the opportunity to stand at the edge of the world and feel small in the best possible way. That's worth more than any building, no matter how grand, no matter how permanent. The curse of the Cliff House isn't really a curse at all. It's a reminder. A reminder that nature is more powerful than human ambition. A reminder that beauty and danger often exist in the same place. A reminder that the most memorable experiences often come with risk. A reminder that nothing lasts forever, and that's okay. The Cliff House has burned 3 times and been rebuilt 4 times. It might burn again. It might stand for centuries. Either way, its story will endure. Passed down through generations, a legend of the edge of the world where human dreams meet the Pacific's eternal indifference. If you enjoyed uncovering the cursed history of the Cliff House, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another fascinating story. Drop a comment below telling us, would you dare to dine at a cursed location? And don't forget to like this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.